Hi everyone, VortexTCG here, and today I'm going to be showcasing you a deck profile on a deck that helped me get first place at my local event, and that is with Blue Flare. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll probably already seen the deck list, but I actually ended up getting first place in BT15 format with Blue Flare, and I want to talk about the deck, the tournament as it went, and yeah, I think this deck's got some legs to it going into regional season, and I'll explain why as we go through the deck profile and the tournament. So if you're looking forward to this video, please do like and subscribe to the channel. It is greatly appreciated, and I thank you all for the continued support on the channel. I really do appreciate it, but let's not waste any more time. Let's go into the, tournament description first and then the deck profile. So my tournament was 3 rounds, not 4. Usually we get 4 in, but it was kind of like a smaller crowd this week. But essentially my first round was against Yellow Vaccine, and I thought this would be a bit of an interesting matchup. Typically Yellow Vaccine is a more mid to late game focused deck, and I'm kind of like in that middle game as well. So I was kind of worried when I was getting paired up against this player because, well, if they get the cards right, I'm pretty sure I could lose very quickly. He is playing the Mastamon version though, and I think that gives me a little bit more respite because I feel like the Mastamon version of Yellow Vaccine is not as good. I think it is a bit clunky at times, and I think that even though, you know, the combo potential is insane, you know, going into Mastamon DNA, playing Lucemon Chaos mode or something like that, it's the level 6 from BT8, you know, and get rid of a Tamer or a Digimon, and, you know, also getting rid of another Digimon through the Mastamon effect can definitely be powerful. But I think at this point in this game state, I feel like that just doesn't do enough, especially when you compare cards such as Levia that is available to be played in this format as well. So yeah, the matchup was quite interesting. The first game was essentially me setting up and my opponent kind of misplaying a little bit. Unfortunately, he decided to delete one of my Digimon instead of the Tamer that had all of the Digicross cards essentially underneath it. So I ended up taking game 1. The most important part of this matchup actually is the fact that Mastamon can go into a guy that, you know, gives everything that's like Angel, Fallen Angel and stuff like that, blocker and retaliation through inheritables. So that's the main thing I was a bit worried about, especially as I just played against this deck at my other locals on Monday. So yeah, I was a bit worried about that, but unfortunately my opponent didn't have it. So essentially game 1 was due to that, and then game 2 was very similar. He ended up building in game 1 he bought a very big board. I think it was like a Mastamon, an Ordinmon, a Fall Down, all those things. But unfortunately I was just able to stun and attack for game because there was no blocker. Game 2 was kind of like a similar situation. I ended up just essentially stunning most of the stuff or just bouncing the stuff back. That included the Gatomon, which kind of sucks if you have to return it back, unfortunately, but in reality it's just what you have to do because, you know, I'd rather them play that for 5 than them going into, for example, a Lady Devi into a Anduamon combo into Mastay. Like, sometimes you have to do that. So I was glad I was able to stun through that, and through that I was essentially able to build a back row of like a couple of Supreme Connections, Blazing Memory Boost, all those things to essentially go for game on the following turn. Game 2 was against Fenry Lugamon, and I was definitely worried going into this matchup because I feel like this is kind of like a feast or famine situation. It's kind of a situation of, does Blue Flare get all the pieces first, or does Fenry get all the pieces first? And luckily for me, I got the pieces most of the time. So game 1 ended up being, you know, pretty back and forward, but unfortunately I don't think my opponent just had enough to finish the game off because, well, I play a card called Sorai, and that means things can't attack. He did have the Chimera, I believe, but unfortunately, you know, just me slowing down through Sorais and trashing sources, you know, really does hinder the opponent in those situations. So I ended up taking game 1. Game 2, he just set up quicker than me, and I just didn't really have much of a response. And yeah, you know, that's just what's happened sometimes. If the setup deck gets set up quicker, they're obviously going to do a lot more very quickly. So yeah, I ended up losing game 2. Game 3 was definitely an interesting game. One of my tech choices in this deck is Azulongmon Ace, and it came in clutch, but not for the right reasons. Unfortunately for my opponent, he decided to go into Fenry Lugamon and then unsuspend using its deleting effect into the Azulongmon. If you don't know, Azulongmon has an on-deletion that allows you to delete the highest level Digimon on the field, so it ended up causing him some problems. He did gain full memory, but unfortunately he wasn't able to, you know, go for the OTK turn essentially. That allowed me to come back and essentially win the game from there. Round 3 was against Digipolice/D Brigade, and yeah, I was a bit worried about this matchup because even though I can stun entire boards, depending on what my hands are, for example, there are definitely situations where, you know, Digipolice/D Brigade can just overwhelm you very, very quickly. And that's what happened in, I believe it was game 1. I could be incorrect, it could be game 2 as well. But he essentially just built a board very quickly, and I just said, can't really do that much. So we went into game 2. I can't remember if that game was game 1 or game 2, but game 2 ended up being, he ended up doing a pretty big misplay. I think he could have potentially won him the game if he decided to play a little bit more safer, but essentially he went into Chimeramon, which I wasn't expecting, but hey, I mean, it's a cool tech choice in that deck because you do play a lot of level 4s in that deck. It's like the High Commandramons, the Numes. He was also playing the Tuarimons as well, which I thought was quite interesting. Didn't get to see that, unfortunately, but I have seen it before in other locals games I've played with him. He unfortunately decided to be a little bit greedy. He decided to swing with the Chimeramon, and it died into security. He thought he had jamming, but unfortunately Chimera isn't a Digipolice or D-Brigade card. I think that's what the requirements is for Satsuki. So yeah, unfortunately it did die, and he said to me after he had the Brigadramon, so he could have just easily just Digivolved into the Brigadramon and avoided that whole situation, which obviously does suck, but I do end up winning game 2 with that. And then in game 3, you know, like there was a lot to go through essentially. I was able to set up pretty early, thankfully, but my opponent was able to get off to the races also. So he ended up going to the Brigadramon, you know, getting essentially, I believe it was like 7 to 8 Digimon out, but somehow, in some way, I was able to stun the entire board and go for game. You know, don't underestimate the Metal Greymon, I guess. But yeah, that was the tournament description. Ended up getting first. I'll put a screenshot up now for proof. And yeah, now that I've talked about my tournament run, let's talk about the deck itself. All right, so let's go over the Blue Flare deck profile. You know, let's start with the eggs. Wanyamon. Yeah, I mean, what is there to say about this card? Essentially, this is the best blue egg you can play, plain and simple. So you play 4 of it. Let's go on to our level 3s now, and I think it's gonna be pretty similar as well. For Gaussmon, I mean, this is a huge piece in your deck because essentially this means play a free guy out, and that guy can be add a Metal Grey, play a Tamer, you know, search 2 cards, stun a guy, if it attacks, they lose 2 memory. Those things, all of those things you can do with this card when you play it. So you play it at 4 because the advantage is too good, and usually your opponent won't want to block with this card because essentially they will think that, oh, maybe it'll live at security. It never does. It never does. Going on to the next card, and it is Free Gaussmon from EX4. I think this card is criminally underrated in this deck just because it is essentially just a draw 1 when you play it. But not only that, if you play a Twilight card, which isn't going to happen that much if I'm being honest, but if you do, you get to add a Digicross requirement card back to your hand, which is always going to be the Metal Greymon. There was a comment on the previous video that said, you know, you're only playing 4, so why bother? But in reality, if you're able to just add a card back and draw a card, you take it. Even if you don't get to add a card back from Digicross requirements, drawing a card is still nice, and it's just continuous advantage that you can get in your deck. So for that reason, I play 3 of it in the deck. Rounding off the level 3s is Ukomon. I'm probably going to do a bit of a discussion at the end of this video, talking about cards I would change, and this is one of them. I do not like this card in this deck. The theory behind it is sound because it kind of makes sense to why you want to play it. You know, stuff like, you know, if you can, for example, there's a comment on the video that said, if you go into this, right, and then you play a Kiriha, or normal Kiriha, set to free Kiriha on your first turn, essentially if you promote this, you'll get 4 memory, and then you can just play a Blazing Memory Boost and memory choke your opponent to 1. In reality, while that sounds really good, you know what's also better? Just playing the memory boost. Just playing the memory boost and not having additional steps, because realistically, this deck, you need to find pieces and you need to set up quick. and currently it is difficult to do that unless you just hard play those cards. So adding more roadblocks to those strategies, to that gameplay, to finding those cards is a bad move. So in my opinion, I wouldn't play this card. I'll talk about some stuff at the end. But yeah, maybe play something like a Dracmon, a Bluecomon, some other cards that can help you synergize with the deck. Then we have 4 Greymon from BT10. This is your searcher of the deck. Reveal 4, add 2, and then save, and then it has an inheritable when attacking. 2 or more Digimon in play, or your opponent's side of the field, unsuspend this Digimon. This is essentially just, you know, swing, unsuspend, swing, and you know, that's just powerful in itself. Yeah, I mean, the inheritable isn't as good as one we'll go into in a bit, but you know, it does come up sometimes, and it is nice in those situations. So you still play 4 of it though, because it is a searcher in the deck, and you know, if you could play a searcher, we play it in this deck. So yeah, we play 4 of this. Going on to our another Greymon, which is the starter deck 1 Greymon. This is the best Greymon by far. The security attack +1 in this deck is crazy, especially when you can think about, you know, other cards you can combine with this. You know, stuff, for example, like, you know, going to Z-Gray after this, and if it has jamming underneath this, you're doing 2 checks again, which is obviously very powerful. And for that reason, yeah, I think this is the better Greymon, but the only thing it has holding it back is that it's a red card, so you can't just, you know, Digivolve on top of it if you want to, and there's no search. But the security attack +1 does mean a lot for this strategy, so you do play 3 of it. Next we go on to the male Bergermons, and we play 3 of the EX4 one. The main thing about this card is that it has jamming when it is as inheritable. So when you combine it with the red Greymon, you're essentially going 2 swings, jamming, and they can't really do much about it. Has a nice on-play effect as well by giving one of your opponent's Digimon with the lowest level when attacking lose 2 memory. So that's nice. It's a nice little bonus, but yeah, mainly you're just going to be playing it for the jamming effect. And for that, and that's good enough. So we play 3 of it in the deck. Finally, we have 3 male Bergermon from BT10. This allows you to play a Kiriha for free if you don't have one in play. If you do have one in play, you get to add a Metal Grey back to your hand, essentially. And it has, when attacking effect is inheritable, if there are 2 or more Digimon on your opponent's side of the field, you get to essentially stun one until the end of their turn. So for that reason, this card is very good if you need to slow the pace of the game down, or they just have a big stack that can threaten lethal in the following turn. So in my tournament run, for example, Mastemon had, I believe, security attack +1, and your Daimon also had security attack +1. So essentially I was just able to stun them out of the game, and they couldn't really do anything from that point. So and in my round 3 opponent, playing this from a Gaussmon allowed me to get Metal Grey back, and for that reason, yeah, just really good card, and you play 3 of it. Next we have the main boss monster of himself, Metal Greymon. This is your main combo piece, I guess. The deck doesn't function without this card, which is why you need to search for it constantly. Has material save 2, so if things die underneath, you get to stack them underneath the Tamer. On play, it gains Rush, and then if you're Digi-crossing, doesn't have to be for 2, it could be for 1 as well in situations. Stun up to 3 things that have equal or less sources than you, and the Digi-cross requirements is Greymon and male Bergermon. Doesn't specify what color Greymon, which is important here. This card is obviously really good because essentially this is your main key piece. The other Metal Grey isn't as good. It's very limiting as well, which is why we don't play it in this version. And yeah, you only need to play 4 of this because essentially if you're able to find 1 or 2, you've pretty much won the game. If you find the pieces, obviously. So yeah, this is obviously the core piece of the deck, and for that reason, you play it at 4. Rounding off the level 5s is Zudomon Ace. This is the, you know, got the normal Ace effect of counter, blast Digivolve, and then on play when Digivolving, trash any 2 sources, important, from your opponent's Digimon, then return one of your opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution cards to the hand. This is really good because not only are you, because what they're going to end up doing for the most of the time is that they're going to swing into your Greymon, for example, because if you don't have a Tamer out, they're going to be like, we can get rid of this, good job. But what you can do, and it happened in my round 1, game 1, I believe, where my opponent decided to swing into this, and he had a Gatomon, I believe, just in play. So I Digivolved this from Blast Digivolve for free, returned the Gatomon back to the hand, and then was able to delete the, I believe there was an Angimon from the battle itself. So for that reason, yeah, this card is good. And just playing on its own is also very powerful. So yeah, you play 4 of it. No, 2 of it, not 4 of it. Then we play 2 Z-Greymon. This is essentially just another extender of the deck, but it's also a really good resource loop. When Digivolving, unsuspend it, and if your opponent has 2 or more Digimon in play, and this has Blue Flare or Crossheart on its traits, you get to gain 2 memory as well. So essentially it just means, for the most part, if you're going for your combo turn, free Digivolve, unsuspend. And then on deletion, it saves, and then you can put a Greymon or a male Birdramon from your trash underneath one of your Tamers that has General in its traits, which is the Kiriha. So yeah, this is just essentially extender. The inheritable doesn't matter in this deck because we are not playing stuff like the Deca Grey. There's like another one as well you can play, I think. But yeah, we don't play that in this version, and I played 2 of this because I feel like you can easily brick on this if you play more than 2. Rounding off the Digimon is Azu Longmon Ace, and I'll talk about this more when we get out of the deck profile, but this has some utility, but I just don't think it's good enough, unfortunately. On play when Digivolving, return one of your opponent's level 5 or lower Digimon to the hand, and then unsuspend one of your Digimon with the Deva, 4 Great Dragons or 4 Sovereigns trait. And then on deletion, delete one of your opponent's Digimon with the highest level. So essentially what this is that it's another unsuspend if you need it, but it's also a good source of removal, returns it back to the hand. Still pretty good in that regard, but one of the cool things about this card is that it has on deletion of deleting the highest level. That came up against my round 2 opponent, mainly because he didn't decide to read the card. Yeah, I mean, the card itself is good. My worry is that you can't really search this in the deck. You have to kind of just hard draw into it. So I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that. But I play 1 in my version of this list. Going into options now, we have 3 Supreme Connection. This is essentially another searcher. Top 5, add among them 1 card with Machine or Cyborg, and then trash 1 with the same traits, and then put this to the battle area. And then delay, when you play a level 5 or higher Digimon card with Machine or Cyborg from your hand, you can reduce the play cost by 3. The security effect is essentially the same. This is good in theory, and I still think it's a good card, but you definitely don't play this at 3. I feel like it's definitely win more at 3, let's put it that way. I feel like you can play other cards in this slot that could be more effective. So in reality, I'd probably open up 1 slot for this and just play 2, because I think 2 fits the deck, if I'm being honest, a lot more than 3. But either way, I think it's still a strong card. I think it still has a place in this deck. It just depends if you want to play it or not. And I think, you know, if you decide to play this, it is essentially just another free Digimon you play, essentially. So for that reason, I do like it in the deck, but maybe there needs to be some tweaking with the ratios for this card. Then we have the most annoying card in the deck, which is 4 Saw Rai. Look, we've got to slow our opponent down somehow, and this card does it. Also, trashing sources in the current game state is actually kind of great, because a lot of the time your opponent's going to be swinging with Tamers as their bottom source. Obviously this trashes the top 4, not the bottom 4, otherwise that'd be crazy. But the utility of this card alone is obviously very strong, and yeah, just being able to essentially slow your opponent down is very important. Helped me in my 3rd round matchup against D-Brigade/DigiPlease quite a bit, because essentially if I was to play this, they have to Digivolve or put Tamers underneath, and while there is a lot of things that put Tamers underneath now, which could, you know, definitely hurt the deck, you know, this card just does quite a bit on its own, so I play 4 of it in the version of this deck. Then we have the best search in the deck of 4 Blazing Memory Boost. This essentially reveals top 6, add 2 cards with Blue Flare, and then you could play a Kiriha for free. Important to note, you need to have 2 Blue Flares that you add, and then also have the Tamer, because if there's only, you know, 2 Blue Flares and one of them is the Tamer, you have to add that card first, and then you won't be able to play the Tamer, essentially. So be careful of that. That is a thing that does happen. In fact, it did happen against me. It happened against me in my tournament run, yeah, just something you have to keep an eye out. But yeah, you can't play less than this, because this card is just too good. Playing out a Tamer for free and searching 2 cards for, you know, a net value of probably like 2 to 3 memory, and you also gain 2 memory as a delay. Yeah, it's pretty good. So we play 4 of it. Then we have 3 Kiriha. Yeah, this card is essentially your set to free Tamer in the deck, and then it has your turn. When you play a guy with Digicross, you can suspend this guy to essentially play from your Tamers instead, or additional, I guess. This card has fallen out of favor a little bit, just due to the fact that, you don't always want to be playing stuff from your sources underneath your Tamers, because now we use our trash as a resource, because that's fair and balanced. So yeah, we do play 3 of it still, because the set to free is important. It essentially just guarantees we can play a Metal Grey for the following turn. But yeah, there is still some, there's a better Tamer now, and we only play this at 3. The better Tamer is Kiriha and Nene, and when I mean it's the better one, I mean it's crazy. It has a start main effects effect of there's 2 Digimon in play, you gain a memory, and then when you would play a Digimon with Digicross requirements, you can use one from your sources and one from trash. And the fact that you can use one from trash just means that this is crazy, because essentially, even if your stuff does get deleted, the one bad thing about save, if you don't have a Tamer, it goes away. It doesn't matter anymore, because this card just says no. So yeah, you have to play 4 of this. It does stack incredibly well, and even just gaining 1 additional memory with this, let alone like 2 or 3 when you have them out, is crazy. So yeah, you do play 4 of this as your main Tamer of the deck. So let's talk about some things that I did or did not like about this deck that I took. This one was kind of like more of a testing thing for me, because there are stuff in here that I haven't tried before. Usually, you play like 6 Metal Greys, not 4. Sometimes you play a different rookie over the Ukomon, and also the inclusion of Supreme Connection as a whole was kind of like a gamble, because I talked about it on my channel. If you watch my deck profile or my first draft example, and I was like a little bit iffy on it, but I felt like it was a pretty good card. But yeah, let's talk about some stuff that I would change in the deck. The first one is going to be this card right here. It's the Ukomon. I don't like it in this deck, because there was constantly times in a tournament or in a match where I would want to Digivolve into this so I can get the advantage on the following turn. But if I Digivolve into this, I no longer have a blue source, and so my follow-up turn of going into, well, my follow-up play essentially of going into Blazing Memory Boost and all that kind of stuff, I just couldn't do, and that sucked, just because I can't play blue options, unfortunately. So yeah, that definitely sucks. So I don't know how I feel about the Ukomon. I think I might change it out for something like a Dracmon. I know Dracmon was being used in this deck a bit, but I might also change it out for the Bluekomon promo, which is the security draw 2 cards, because I think consistency needs to be boosted in this deck somewhere. And while I do think Ukomon is a good card, I don't think it fits the deck. There were some comments in the previous first draft that I did about this deck, and while there are good concepts of like going into essentially like a set to free Tamer in the Kiriha, promote the Uko, gain a memory, hatch an egg, go into another level 3, and then put Blazing Memory Boost, and then put them to 1, memory choking them. While that sounds good on paper, I just don't think it's realistic. The deck, you just need to get set up now. You can't essentially just wait a turn to use Blazing Memory Boost. You just need to use the Blazing Memory Boost as quickly as possible. The other card that in this list that I'm not 100% sure on is the Azulongmon itself. Now, obviously this did win me a game essentially, but I'm not 100% sure on how I feel about it as a whole, because while it did win me a game, it was because my opponent just didn't read the card essentially. So, I guess your opponent not having knowledge in a card because they decide not to read it is a good thing, I guess, in this situation. But realistically, I just don't think this card does enough. It does have a really good counter effect, and obviously if you can't go for game and your Metal Greymons are still alive, you can obviously go into the Azulongmon. But if I'm being realistic, you can't search it, you have to draw into it. You barely draw in this deck as it is, so I just feel like this is a bit of a dud card. At least with like the Zudomon Ace, it has, just good utility on its own. With this, you don't really be passing to 7 by playing this card. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on the Azulongmon. I would definitely recommend putting something like a Death X in or something like that. Last but not least is obviously the card that is kind of like a big deal in this archetype, or I've tried to make it being a big deal in this archetype, is the Supreme Connection. And I do have some mixed feelings about this card. Obviously, in my first draft, I put 4 of it. Guys, it's a draft. It's not going to be, optimal, you know, decks. It's just kind of like a guide to what you should play. So I played 3 in this version, and I feel like 3 is still too much. I think 2 is probably going to be the perfect number for this card, because it does feel a bit win more in certain situations, because essentially the search itself throughout the whole tournament, I wasn't able to trash one of the cards from the search, which sucks because you kind of want to do that. I was always able to get the search off, but not the trash effect off, which kind of sucked. The delay effect is really good. However, I do think it's a bit win more, because essentially if you've had the memory to, you know, play this card out and, you know, pass the turn and then go for another swing, I feel like you've probably already won anyways. And I feel like this is just essentially Kiriha copy 4, 5, 6. So not sure how I feel about it. It does come up clutch sometimes, especially if you hit it in security. It does make a huge impact there, but overall, not 100% sure on it. I'd probably test it out at 2, and then if I don't like it at 2, I'd probably cut the card altogether. But anyways, that has been my deck profile / tournament discussion about Blue Flare. I honestly do think that Blue Flare can, you know, sneak into top cuts of regionals at this point. I think there is a lot of utility in this deck that people are just not discussing. But I think the biggest factor going for Blue Flare in this format is the fact that people don't know what it does. Obviously, you know, it was very good a couple of formats ago, but at this point, I don't think anyone really knows what these cards do. I mean, throughout the whole tournament, you know, they were like, what does this card do? You know, and these are like good players that we're talking about here. So if good players don't know what stuff like the male Bergermon does, I think you can definitely take some, you know, surprise wins at regionals or Ultimate Cups coming up. So definitely a deck you should look out for, and I think it has even more utility going into future formats. But let me know what you think about the deck and the tournament run. Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Let me know in the comments section down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.